thanks to all of you here who have come to join us for this AKC General Lecture Series on dreams, visions, and utopias. The material has been actually arranged in something of a chronological order. So we've tried to make it sort of historically from earlier times, moving towards more contemporary times. And at the same time, you'll also see that the series has been put together in a way whereby you will be moving quite a lot across the globe geographically. So we want to give you a rather comprehensive approach to dreams, visions, and utopias. Now, the term utopia often tends to evoke a non-existent society. Yeah, it can be like an imagined ideal world, place, or state. Maybe like the ideal dream life that I mentioned moments before. Yeah, maybe for you, being a hockey player or a human farmer is not just enjoying those activities, but actually doing it with quite a lot of other people that creates a wider sort of interest in utopian sort of locale for that. In today's usage, the idea that a utopia is a non-existent society, well, that's not the only meaning for it. It's come to take on yet additional kinds of connotations. So what is imagined, perhaps we can say does exist. A utopia doesn't have to be something totally fictional. That which comes out of the imagination, we can say exists at least as a social fact. Yes, we all have imaginations. I hope we all perhaps have a sense of humor in the same way. This is something that exists out there. A utopia in that sense can be said to exist. It's a notion, perhaps as a utopia, but for some it can be an actual place that's conceptualized, recognized, and made the subject of debate.
Who in this room thinks that their dreams tell them something significant either about their past or their future? Who in this room thinks that their dreams are messages from God or gods or ancient relatives or anything like that? Okay, I find this interesting because the cultures that I study are so far removed from us in time, and yet they're also so human. They have the same fears that we do, they have the same worries, and they live essentially in the same world, even though they did not have iPhones. The next question then is, well, if you have dreams, if dreams are significant, who gets to interpret them? Well, in ancient Mesopotamia, we had professionals whose job it was to interpret dreams. They, presumably, we don't know exactly what their training was, but it's very likely that they went through a scribal education because they needed to learn how to read and write, particularly read, so that they could use the large compendia, the large collection of dream interpretation that existed, so that they could make sense of what people dreamt within their own culture.
So Buddhism, or the life of the Buddha, actually begins with a dream. So the Buddha is conceived in a dream. You can see on the right there in the picture in front of you, a very healthy-looking elephant landing on a woman. The woman is the mother of the Buddha. She's called Maya. Her name, by the way, means illusion. And this carving that you can see is from the 2nd century before the Common Era, so about 300 years after Buddhism began. So the Buddha mother has attended a ritual, and she's gone to sleep. And in the sleep, gods carry her bed, and a white elephant enters her womb. So after she wakes, priests interpret the dream. Your son will either be a global emperor or conquer samsara, the round of rebirth, and awaken, the title Buddha means awakened, to the truth. This dream story is depicted globally throughout Buddhist art. It's a very popular story. But it tells us quite a bit about early Indian ideas about dream. The elephant symbolism, the elephant represents kingship and fertility. Dreams cause conception. This is an early Indian belief. Dreams are connected with conception, and the reason for this is because dream is recognized as a form of consciousness. It's an immaterial consciousness. And in dreams, you can therefore meet other immaterial forms of consciousness, including beings which are waiting to be reborn and finding a place to be reborn. In early Indian religion, a cure for infertility was to go and sleep in a temple, and in your dreams, the gods might arrive and help you to conceive. Another theme we get from this dream story is that significant people have significant dreams that may affect us. So kings and queens typically have important dreams. And another thing we find is that dreams require interpretation. So we don't necessarily understand our own dreams. Only specific people can interpret the dreams.
The kingdom of God being nigh, at hand, near, is about transformation. It's about transforming the world, a vision of a different world to the world that is currently in the here and now. So when I say Jesus, I've just launched in and started to talk about Jesus. You may ask, who is Jesus? Some of you know Jesus, who Jesus is pretty well. What we have in terms of Jesus, in terms of our general knowledge in the 21st century, is born of 2,000 years of Christian tradition. And the image we have of Jesus is not the Jesus of the first century. He didn't look like this image that we recognize as Jesus from Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper or from the Mandylion image, a Byzantine image of Jesus. That long-haired, bearded, white-robed figure is a little bit holy, well, a lot holy, holier than ordinary human beings, and tends to sort of sweep through very calmly and placidly and authoritatively, and it's hard to imagine him getting worked up about anything. But the Jesus of history, the human Jesus that I'm really interested in, is actually a much grittier, rougher, rather more passionate character than the sort of image that you have from Leonardo's Last Supper. You can't really imagine him getting particularly upset about anything. And one of the things that I see in the historical Jesus is a man who was very, very concerned with what was going on in his time and very concerned about the oppression that he saw around him, especially the poverty that he saw in the Galilee where he grew up. So in fact, Jesus, I think, it's no wonder he gets picked up by people like Occupy and other movements. They recognize that there's something in his spirit, in his teaching, that is very relevant.
Of course, you're right. The conversion of Paul, it is a pivotal moment, utterly dramatic, world-making. The most fervent adversary of the early Christians becomes, it seems, in a moment, by a bolt from the blue, its most famous and influential advocate. What a thought. The road to Damascus, it's now really a totem, a slogan for utter change around of views, of outlook, of senses of belonging. Let's hear the story. It is told by St. Luke in the Acts of the Apostles, the second volume of his two-part work, the Gospel of Luke and then Acts of the Apostles. And we encounter St. Paul under his original name of Saul, shortly after Jesus' death, and heavens, it may only have been months after Jesus' death. Jesus' followers are frankly causing rather a ruckus in Jerusalem. His followers appear to be castigating the temple and its rites and its rulers, and insisting that in some sense, Jesus was the temple's replacement. Among the most eloquent, spirit-led, charismatic of these followers of Jesus was Stephen, who is eventually arrested and he is stoned to death. Not a pretty way to go. And Luke, in a most chilling aside, introduces a young man standing by whose name was Saul, who carried the clothes of those who were doing the stoning of Stephen. And Saul was consenting with the deed. Bad start.
Let me now turn to our first classical theorist, Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina, or Avicenna, is undoubtedly the most famous Muslim philosopher inside and outside the Muslim world. His work had a significant impact on medieval Jewish and Christian philosophy and medicine. His medical compendium, the Canon of Medicine, for example, was translated from Arabic into Latin and was used as the standard medical textbook in the Latin West for years. For this reason, Ibn Sina is better known in the West under his Latinized name, Avicenna, still today. What I would like to focus on now, however, is his philosophical thought, particularly his study of the soul, or psychology. His discussion on veridical dreams appears as part of his explanation of various powers or faculties of the animal soul, in particular his theory of the internal senses. First of all, Ibn Sina has a tripartite analysis of the soul of the human being: the rational soul, the animal soul, and the vegetative soul. which, by the way, doesn't mean that there are three souls. It's a single soul, but can be analyzed in these three terms.
In 1781, Austria's monarchy issued a liberal edict that granted new rights to Jews, including greater freedom of movement and settlement and the right to take up a wider range of occupations. 10 years later, the French National Assembly, after the French Revolution, decided to grant full citizenship to French Jews. Prussia's government, however, resisted the idea of recognizing Jews as equal to other Germans and retained a very restrictive and complex immigration framework that applied to all Jews no matter how long they and their families had already lived in the Prussian state. Some of these regulations may remind us of modern tiered visa systems, yet minus the right to apply for indefinite leave to remain and without a defined path towards citizenship. In other words, Prussian Jews were still only tolerated in a rather hostile environment and continued to fear expulsion, but they hoped, in the context of the European Enlightenment, to succeed eventually in their struggle for emancipation. It was in this situation that a controversy erupted between two famous public intellectuals, Johann David Michaelis, a theologian who promoted a non-theological approach to the Hebrew Bible based on languages, anthropology, and sociology, and Moses Mendelssohn, the most famous Jewish philosopher of the time. Michaelis was adamant that Jews could not become Germans. He considered them foreigners, although Jewish families had lived in German-speaking lands for nearly 1,000 years. According to Michaelis, there were many reasons for denying equal rights to Jews, and among them was their dream of an end to exile and a return to Palestine.
Contrary to the kind of prophecy of the Enlightenment and science, millenarian ideas and groups have proliferated throughout the 20th century and remain with us in the first decades of this century. And indeed, some of them have shaken the world by committing acts of violence, creating the impression that the world is facing an epidemic of doomsday cults, with irresponsible charismatic leaders taking their brainwashed members on the road to mass suicide and homicide.
Today I'll be talking about a very important contemporary development in politics, which is populism, a worldwide development which many people are taking note of. And in particular, I will be thinking about what populists do to cast a vision for society, what sorts of dreams, what sorts of dystopian or utopian ideas do they put forward through a range of places around the world. And I actually want to begin with the reason why this was something that interested me in the first place, which was the election of Donald Trump as President of the United States. And Donald Trump is an enigmatic, unusual, very different character to have as an American president. But one area or way in which he's extremely unusual that people don't always recognize or comment upon is how non-religious he is as an American president. It's quite unusual to have such a non-religious president. A lot of his rhetoric has been dystopian. It's actually been deeply negative and pessimistic, and that is quite unusual as well. So a great example actually is this his inauguration address. Inauguration addresses in the U.S. Have brought forward what Robert Bellah calls a kind of civil religion, where God is invoked and a general sense of destiny of the United States is brought forward, where elements of America's history are thought to be actually led by the presence of God in history. There was a much darker tone to Donald Trump's inauguration speech, in particular in the way that he used this language of American carnage. And so he spoke about crime and gangs and drugs that have stolen too many lives and robbed our country of so much unrealized potential. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now. Now he goes on to continue to talk about dreams and uniting the nation together, but it can't be missed that as you read through this entire speech, it does have quite a negative tone. It's really speaking about America, at least as having a dystopian present, if not also a dark future.